Okay, today what I'm going to do is run over my mining operation on the Moon, and how I basically have a milk run where I have a heavy fuel lander which goes up and down collecting fuel, and some of the thoughts and concepts around how I run this operation. I'm on a system which can get a lot of fuel up into space easily, and when I say easily, I mean in real time. So let's have a look at some orbits here. We've got our station sitting there, which I'll dock with later. We have our refinery sitting there on the equator, or very close to the equator. This little marker here is intended just to make it easier for me to spot that refinery for setting up nodes and so on and so forth. Okay, so the alarm clock's gone off. It's told me it's time to drop this thing. So one of the first things I'm going to do is a slight axial tilt because it's not quite on the equator. So there we go. We'll just run around to there, open up the engine, and get to about there. All right, now I'm going to get ready to burn off some velocity. Now, ultimately, when we're getting close to the surface, we want to go to the surface. So I'm going to switch there now because it makes very little functional difference. There she's floating along, and I'm actually going to change that to elevation above ground level because that's going to become important later, and I don't want to forget. Ready for a reverse burn. So I'll start out with a nice hard one. And I don't want to burn it all the way. Let's get to about there, and when we get a bit closer, we'll do another burn. Let's just get that axial tilt thing happening a little bit closer. There we go. Just a second. So ultimately I'm going to aim to go just slightly beyond the refinery, and when we get on the ground you'll be able to see why I do that. So with this thing, it's basically 3 biggest liquid fuel tanks with 16 nerve engines. This thing will get off the moon, it'll get off Moho, easily gets off Minimus. Apart from liquid fuel, I've got a couple of rocket fuel tanks there, and I also have this RCS tank as well. Now with the RCS, it uses the rocket fuel RCS units, and I'll explain a little bit closer why it is even bother with the monopropellant. Okay, so when we get just beyond the refinery, let's have a bit of a look around. Oh, you may notice in the very distance there, you have the arch of the moon, and there's a refinery on the ground. So I'm going to come down and land just beyond it. So, I've got this monopropellant tank, but this thing doesn't use monopropellant. And the reason I've got that is because every time she takes off and docks to the moon, it can take a little bit of monopropellant up with it, and that comfortably keeps my monopropellant supplies completely stocked without having to do a separate lander to do a separate operation. So there's no special monopropellant operation. Alright, let's do another burn. Now, one of the things you notice is that I've still got plenty of delta V. I started off with about 2,200 units of fuel. With this sort of operation, the tyranny of the rocket equation finally comes to advantage, because having a little bit of extra fuel gives you a lot more delta V, which gives you plenty of wiggle around room, which is good for this operation. So if you look at the nav ball, you can see how the target is slightly ahead. Looking at it from above here, you can see I'm clearly going to land just slightly beyond it. Running the speed low burns more fuel. but also gives you really precise control. Okay, only 100 metres from the surface now. And I'll just continue to do burns, such that when I hit the deck, I'm not hitting it too hard. And there we go. Alright, so this thing's on the deck. Now all I have to do is dock it with the refinery. So before I do that, let's have a bit of a look at the refinery. So this thing's a monster. It's actually built in two parts. So this front part here is my normal standard refinery that I build for these sorts of operations. Has 4 ISRUs, has 3 tanks, has plenty of solar power, plenty of heatsink capacity, and it has plenty of fuel cells. So the idea is that this thing can operate day and night, and I never have to turn it. It never turns off. It just continuously generates fuel. And I want this to operate as a standalone system. I don't want to have to continuously come back and fiddle with it, extending or retracting heat sinks or having to turn on or turn off fuel cells. It just sits there and continuously generates fuel. I kind of like to think of that lovely bit from Mad Max where the gyro captain describes refining in the desert.
Day and night it's pumping. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. Fuel to burn. They got the lot. Power, lights, you name it.
Ore distribution on the moon. So I've only got 4%. Which meant my standard refinery just was not generating fuel fast enough for me. So I built a second refinery module which just has a massive overload of drills, so I could get a lot more ore happening and join that one as well. So with the refinery, I've very deliberately placed it close to the equator, ideally on the equator. And in fact, once upon a time it was precisely on the equator. If we zoom out a little bit, you can see up here, 1.4 kilometres away, you have a ground anchor. So originally, I actually nailed it to the surface of the moon, so it wouldn't slip and slide, it would stay in place. It's not particularly slopey here, but it was enough that the refinery would ever so slowly move over time. However, I found that about 20% of my docking operations resulted in a rapid unscheduled disassembly, and that was a real pain in the backside. So in the end I decided just to undock it, and it has over time slowly slid down that slope to 1.4 kilometres away. That's also the reason why I'm landing on the far side of the refinery. It's actually easier to land on the other side, but in its gentle slide down that slope, the refinery has in fact managed to do a complete 80 degree turn. Now I could theoretically lift it up, turn around and put it back down again, but that's going to be a lot of effort, and it really isn't that much harder to land on the other side of it. So now I want to dock with that refinery. As I said, we've got plenty of fuel for this particular operation. I've still got almost 300 delta V left, and I've got plenty of oxidizer for the tank. That's because nothing up in the moon station needed any oxidizer, so at the moment I've got full tanks, but usually I would just leave a little bit of oxidizer in the tank. So there's two ways you can move it forward. You can either RCS it or you can creep it. So I'm going to set it to radial out and turn it ever so slightly. Tilt it forwards and give it a bit of grunt. Now, because it's pointing radially outwards, I can get it a little bit of forward motion and then just let it hover above the ground until I get that much closer to the docking port. Very important, of course, to control these little burns. I'm just giving it little blasts. And now it's just going to land round about there. There we go. Now I'll straighten it up. Nice and parallel. And then finally use the RCS to burn it in. And there we go, we're connected. So now it's just a matter of transferring all that fuel in the refinery into the lander. Now, this operation sitting here, basically in daylight hours will completely fill those 4 tanks, and the time it takes for this thing to get off the ground, up to the station, dump a load of fuel, and then turn around and come back again. So that's probably about 1.5 hours in game time. And by the time I can actually land the thing again, there's a full load of fuel ready to go. So the reason I have this operation close to the equator is because it means you don't have to do axial tilts when you're going up and down. And just removing one whole parameter from your operation just means that you've got more flexibility, got more robustness, and it's easier to do. I did have to do a little bit of a tilt at the beginning. That's acceptable. But let's just imagine there's an ore field that produced, 50% more ore, but it was 30 degrees off the equator. In my mind, it's not worth it. You may as well just simply wait a bit longer between runs. Alright, so main tanks are full. Now what we want to do is make sure these are full as well. And last but not least, the monopropellant. And you can see that that's slowly filling up. That's because the in total there's 8 ISRUs between these 2 modules that are joined together, and they are just continuously generating fuel, oxidizer, and monopropellant. So we now have a full load. Let's separate this thing. You notice that I've got a couple of large heat sinks there that I haven't extended, and that's because when they are extended, I have a habit of hitting them. There's a higher probability that I'm going to hit them when I'm moving this thing. And as I have a surplus, I don't really have to worry about it. I'm going to hit radial out again, and give it a burst. Let it tilt forwards a bit. And I just want to get it far away enough from the refinery that when it takes off later, there's absolutely zero risk that I'll inadvertently tap something and then watch the entire thing have one huge, unscheduled deconstruction. So another thing you notice, looking at the nav ball, is I've got myself lined up pretty much perfectly, and when she takes off, it's going to be at 90 degrees. Let's go back to this view here. Kerbal Station now is all the way over here. I'm going to select that as a target. Now I want to take off when that station is back around here somewhere. And to do that, I actually go to the station itself and set up an alarm clock. And here we are at the station itself. And at the moment, it doesn't have a lot of fuel in it. There we go. So the load that comes up is going to come pretty close to filling up those tanks. So what I want to do is set up an alarm clock. I'll set up about here. Now my alarm clocks default to ringing 1 minute prior to the manoeuvre. So let's drop a manoeuvre in there, give it a name. Okay, so the placeholder bit tells me that it's something else that's going to be moved when that thing gets to that location. So when the station gets to that point, that's when you want the fuel lander to actually take off, but it's not the station itself that has to have something happen to it. Moon fuel lander, that's that tank down there that's waiting to take up, and lift, well, it's going to lift up. So I set that alarm clock there, apply changes, and then I get rid of the maneuver node. As you can see over here, I've got a few other things that are happening. Let's see, I've got a runabout that's going to rendezvous with Kerb Station. I've got a triple fuel tank that's going to rendezvous with Kerb Station as well. Please note, these two are pretty close together. That's going to be a pretty tight operation. And then I've got I've captured a B-class asteroid, and I need to tilt that to bring it into orbit properly. So these three things are going to happen before this thing takes off. So by setting these little alarm clocks, it means that I can go do something else, and then when something time critical is happening, the alarm clock goes off and I say, okay, that's what I've got to do. We will come back later when it's time to launch this thing and take it back to the moon station. Okay, the alarm has gone off and it's time for this thing to lift. So let's just have a quick look at where the station is. Sitting there right where I want it. So I'm just basically going to lift up and rendezvous with that thing. Switch to orbital and give it full juice. Probably a little bit steeper than is ideal. In fact, I'm going to deliberately flatten this out a little bit. And as it's going up, I keep an eye on the time to the apoapsis. And the key thing here is that if that time starts decreasing, it means that you've got a risk of crashing. So this refinery is sitting in a crater. It's pretty important that I manage to get over the crater wall there, which it's going to do with no problems whatsoever. You'll also see that the descending node and the ascending nodes are about in the right spot for what I want. I don't want to be burning too far away from those, so I want it to be get as close to the orbit of the station as possible. I can get those a little bit closer just simply by doing a bit of a burn when I get to that ascending node. So let's put a placeholder there. Notice that I've done those other activities, so I've rendezvoused those two. I've got my B-class capture in place, and that's lifted. So I'm just going to create a maneuver there. If, hypothetically speaking, I had something else happening, then there'd be enough time to do another burn or something like that in between. However, for the purpose of this demonstration, the next thing happening is going to be that. So let's just time warp straight to it. So I want to do an anti-normal burn at the ascending node. And the more you burn, the closer you get, the less the angle is. So you reduce the amount of burn. Notice over here that we're now 0.2 kilometres away from it. I set myself up a rendezvous node. So whenever I'm setting up a rendezvous node, I always am quite descriptive. That way, if I could have a rendezvous node, say for an asteroid capture, that might be days away. So when I get around to it later on, I can clearly see that's what that is all about. I can get rid of that placeholder as well. Now again, usually I might do something in that 15 odd minutes, but for the purpose of demonstration, let's go straight there. There we go. Okay. We're coming very close to the station now. And I want to basically stop it dead. Not too close to the station. What I do now is I control from here, go to the station, select that docking port as a target, and I'm going to dock it to this tank here. So I'll hit control from here, and point it towards the target, set that as a target, point that towards the target. Let's move the sun somewhere where we can see things. There we go. And now those two are coming into nice, perfect alignment. Now, if you time warp slightly, it'll help flatten out those wiggles. There we go, the wiggles are gone. Now, when we're burning towards it, you don't actually want to have that pointing towards the target because any small wiggles will then get amplified. So I'll just swap between them, bump, bump, and now so as you can see, I've burned about 4,000 units of fuel getting the lander up to the station. Let's drop this fuel into these tanks. So I'm leaving 1,500 odd units of fuel there. That will be more than enough to get it back down again. So also, I would typically drain the RCS tank, but I do believe that there's not much monopropellant required on the station. There's only 5 units, so I'm not going to bother draining them. And likewise, oxidizer. Yeah, something there needs a bit of oxidizer. Let's move it across. Ah, lo and behold. Now, I don't want to completely drain the oxidizer tanks. I just want to have a little bit for a bit of manoeuvring when it gets back down the ground. However, I might just transfer a bit more fuel into that central tank. One of the things you would notice is that it was only draining the outer tanks when it was going up, and that's very, very deliberate, which just makes it a little bit easier to manage the fuel. So I'll just bring that back up. There we go, 2,000. Too much. There we go. Turn the SAS on, give it a little bit of a blast, just so that it's well and truly out of the way of the station whenever it does whatever it does next, which is going to be dropped to pick up and unload fuel. Control from here. I've actually set up a quick action group to change the control as well. And then last but not least, we set the refinery as a target and create a maneuver mode. So in about 7 minutes, the alarm goes off and I get to do it all again. Thank you very much for listening.